In our attempts to present valuable and often unknown information to the public, we often stumble upon people of extraordinary character, and such is the case of our next guest, a man who has made significant contributions in the world of academics, social service, and penal reform. He has studied internationally, attending both Princeton University and the University of Tanzania in Africa. He is the author of Western Psychology and Indian Thought, and has interests ranging from law to yoga to the Krishna movement. Please welcome Bhakti Tirtha Swami and University of Chicago student Garuda Das. Thank you for being with us this evening. Swami, I'd like to ask you, you're currently directing a program called Urban Spiritual Development. Tell us a little bit about it.
The Urban Spiritual Development Program, it's a rather new aspect of the Krishna conscious movement. And it deals basically with social welfare concerns. For instance, my particular area is dealing primarily with helping to deal with establishing restaurants which are serving as cultural centers. For instance, in our restaurants, we have them in Cleveland and Washington, and we feed people at a very nominal price. And some days we open the restaurants and we serve them food free, vegetarian foodstuffs. It allows them a chance to have contact with people who are engaged in very moralistic and philosophical concerns. For instance, in Washington, we've been making programs with the government, and they have arranged so that prisoners, when they're released, they're sometimes sent to our facility. And we speak with them and sort of give them a certain kind of moral stimulation, which allows them to go out in society and to feel more productive and to actually to adopt more of a spiritual kind of consciousness.
I take it you're proselytizing, are you not?
No, just recently there was an interesting article in the Washington Afro-American paper in Washington, and they were particularly speaking to that point, that categorically that they felt that the service we were rendering was very significant, and the fact that we did not try to convert anyone, but we simply gave them positive alternatives. But now, if someone wants to join our society, then surely he has full opportunity.
As a consequence of the program, how many people have been converted to your beliefs?
Well, at this time, we have a few who are interested in joining. Now, we are more interested in just giving them a chance to study ours, because this is a very scientific process. And it demands very much from an individual. For instance, we're celibate, and there's what is called brahmachari life, where one takes the life of celibacy. Now, my colleague who's with me, Garuda, he is a householder, a family member, but we do not engage in illicit sex and drugs, intoxication, or meat eating. So we like people to join us who are very serious about trying to understand more about the human condition, and people who want to have a very direct and personal realization of God, and those who want to be able to see themselves as servant of mankind.
And so after an individual who would want to join in your beliefs accepts this, will you accept that individual?
We would stipulate that he would come to our classes on a regular basis, and if he feels that he would like to join our society, then at that time he has the opportunity to live with us and to make an experiment.
Garuda, is the Krishna movement a branch of the Hindu religion?
That is the scholarly way of classifying Krishna consciousness often. But the word Hindu does not appear in the Vedas at all. It is a word which has been superimposed by Western scholars.
What are the Vedas? I think we need to...
The Vedas are the ancient spiritual texts found coming from ancient India. The four Vedas, Rig, Yajus, Artha, and Sama, and also the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita could be considered Vedic literatures.
And so the bottom line is
we say no, it is not a Hindu religion, because Krishna consciousness expounds the essence or the principles of religion. Although we may appear externally to be a sectarian group or a particular tradition, rather, if one can go a little bit beyond the outer or the externals, one can easily see that what we are concentrating on are the principles of religion, or the real essence of religion.
All religion.
And this is what I'm studying, of course, in the university and trying to explain.
Gentlemen, what we'd like to know now, we'd like to know about your background. Swami, you at one time were Mike Favors, correct?
John Favors.
John Favors. And at 14, you were president of all the student SCLC chapters in the country. Tell us a little about your formative years. Where were you born? How did you grow up? What kind of a youngster were you?
This is always a question of interest to me. In one sense, it would seem as if my lifestyle now is a diametrical opposite of how I was living in the late 60s.
Yes.
Because I was very much involved in revolutionary politics. I was involved in Pantherism and the cultural nationalistic movement. I was chairman of the Third World Coalition for several of the Ivy League schools, and I was president of the Black Coalition for Students at Princeton. But then and even now, my real interest is that I wanted to understand more about the human condition, and I wanted to understand what is necessary in producing a more just and peaceful world order, and I wanted to be a part of a program or of a process that allowed men, or allowed one, to be able to relate more and more on a humanistic platform. So, in my last years at Princeton, I sort of started backing away from some of the revolutionary activities.
Why?
Because I started seeing, I would visit a lot of different countries, for instance, and I was being trained up in a particular revolutionary circle. And I started seeing that so many of the leaders, or so many of the propagators who were interested in reform and revolution, that as soon as they had chance to be in charge, so to speak, and many times they would be even more oppressive, even more exploitive than the previous regimes.
Were these atheistic circles you were being trained in?
In most cases, yes. Marxist circles and things of that
Communist
nature. Yes.
influence.
And so I started seeing that the real change was not a change of one political arena versus another, but it was actually a change of understanding more about man himself. Because if you put a certain kind of person in a particular environment, still he will act and go on in that given way. But if you can change an individual's consciousness, this is much more significant. This is more profound. So I started investigating so many different epistemologies. I wanted to know more about the African worldview, about the Indian worldview. And in between, I took a job at the Public Defender's Office in New Jersey, working in penal reform. And then from that, I started studying so many books on yoga and meditation. And I finished my thesis at Princeton with an experiment in hypnosis. And by this particular kind of scrutiny, I started looking more at concepts about peak experiences, about dreams, about life after death. And so from those experiments in hypnosis, I started realizing that man is not actually a material being. I would take sometimes my subjects through what is called regression. I would take them back to age 15, to age 5, back to the womb, and even back further.
You could do this through hypnosis.
Yes, through hypnosis. And from that I could see, and there were ways to test to see if actually one was speculating, conjecturing, or whether it was actually fact. And so I wanted to attach myself to a cosmology and to a group that had this kind of information under its belt. And so I studied and I visited this center, that center, and then I had the opportunity to visit the Hare Krishna Center. And at first, in no way did I want to join, but I started reading the books more and more, and I found the information that was there in the Veda, in the Purana, was far superior to any of the studies that I had at Princeton and to any of the other groups that I had visited. And so I became more and more involved, and now I'm one of the chief priests, and I travel literally all around the world helping to institute certain programs.
So what is your mission in life, Swami, at this point?
My mission is to continue doing what I'm doing now, but much more of that. For instance, now we're helping with these sort of social welfare projects, and it's a way to give people more contact with our movement and to simply to present them with a positive alternative. Now we see in the world order there is such, we're finding ourselves in an endangered planet where there is resource depletion, overpopulation, threat of nuclear war. And so we're interested in showing people that there is actually a positive alternative. That there is so many experiences to be had. There is so much more to the conscious and subconscious mind. If one has the ability to purify his senses, then he can understand more that he is a spiritual entity, and he can have more direct perception of his relationship to God, to Krishna.
Do you have difficulty selling that philosophy to people? Because you must admit, gentlemen, that the popular image of the Krishna consciousness movement is is the image of an individual selling flowers at O'Hare Airport. Mm-hmm. Are you concerned about that kind of stereotype, if you will?
We are concerned, and that we're concerned that people choose to speculate rather than to educate themselves on our position. Most people who, for instance, have negative attitudes toward us have never really tried to understand or to speak with the person that is approaching them. Just as I'm a graduate from Princeton and my colleague is a graduate from Harvard and now he's attending the University of Chicago. They will find that our people have exceptional intelligence. Even our students, our children, their various sociological tests have been done and they've found that they're actually above intelligence. So if they would take the time to scrutinize, to really see what we're doing, many people would be very astounded and very amazed.
Garuda, I'm just curious, tell us a little about your background. Well, what was your name before you changed it?
Graham Schweig was my name. Is still my legal name.
Yes.
I come from a background that was very much oriented toward the arts, not so much religious at all, mainly toward the arts, and I also was very much involved in the arts, and particularly music and architecture even. That's significant because I always took to the arts in a way that I was always trying to go deeper and deeper. I was trying to go to the arts to take me further and further toward truth, because art does provide truth, not maybe in the way modern scientific inquiries would require, but certainly there is a truth in art. And so I always was sensitive towards that truth, and I kept trying to go further and further, and soon I found myself going into various philosophies, religious scriptures I consulted to try to get more and more sensitive to what truth is and what its nature is and so forth. And then finally, through reading many Bhagavad Gitas, I read 13 translations of the Bhagavad Gita and never found any of them really transmitting, it seemed, what the content of the Bhagavad Gita is. So back then I was exegetically sensitive. And finally I came across our spiritual teacher's Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And there, for the first time, after 13 other Bhagavad Gitas, I was able to understand the real message of the Gita, and how it, and there we find the Gita addressing us fully, whereas the other Gitas were translated either for some scholarly exercise or for some kind of sectarian preference, or so. Ultimately, I came to Krishna consciousness to understand the supreme aesthetic, or God as the most God as the all-attractive, supremely beautiful being, which is an unusual concept in the history of all religions. That God is the all-attractive. Usually, God is the Big Father, or which is an acceptable relationship with God. But what makes Krishna consciousness unique is that God is all-attractive. He's the most beautiful.
And I guess, Swami, you would agree with that. I have one final question for you, Swami. You speak of the high level of intelligence of your members, and yet, can you offer any hope to the inner city youngster who perhaps is looking at you at this moment and say, what can he do for me? Can he bring hope out of the desperation, out of the chaos of my life in the streets? What can you say to that, Swami?
Yes, unequivocally. Because Krishna consciousness, it is a movement for the entire world. And it is more than a religion, it is a science. For instance, we do not disagree with the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. But we feel that if a person wants to have a more intimate relationship with God, then we can afford this. Now, ultimately, everyone is looking for pleasure. And that pleasure can be found from coming from the source. Everyone wants pleasure.
Intellectual pleasure.
We categorize that, but pleasure in general. But obviously, the highest pleasure can come from the source of pleasure. You want something, if you can actually find the source, then you're much more likely to be able to get a nice supply of that. So therefore, the source is the controller, and the controller is God. So we simply want people to see more and more of the necessity of not only recognizing, being cognizant that there is a controller, but then we like them to try to understand the specific qualities and attributes of that controller. And that is what Krishna consciousness offers, which one will practically not find in any other philosophy or religious school.
But that's an awfully intellectual argument, isn't it? I mean, how do you reach people who perhaps are not so intellectually inclined?
Yes.
How do you do that?
Then we have, just as we have these social welfare
Yes.
programs, we do not necessarily speak so much philosophy. We offer them, we let them see a very interesting culture that is based on real wonderful exchanges, and a person can involve himself as much as he likes.
Good. Thank you, Garuda. Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
We'll be back with Common Ground in just a moment.